Hello and welcome. This is a video guide to getting started in Veritasium's VeADIR platform. In this video, we will look at an overview of the VeADIR platform and its functionality. We'll learn about the spectator and participant roles. We'll review current performance returns on open exposures. We'll look at how to set up the VeADIR and configure it. We'll offer vary and get vary through economic rent, and we'll open an exposure using Ethereum as our funding currency and Veritaseum as the platform and research fee. Let's get started. So the VeADIR is accessible from Veritasium's homepage. You can go to veritaseum.com. We'll actually redirect you to veritas.veritasium.com. And on the home page itself, there are some general information, background information, as well as further details from the menu, 3-bar menu in the upper right. In the video today, we're going to look at the VeADIR, the VE rent facility, and VE exposure. VE research, VE management, and VE tokenization are Veritasium functionality for internal employees to help manage the platform. But the VeADIR, the VE rent, and the VE exposure are the parts of the VeADIR suite that we'll be accessing as a user on the platform. And to access the VeADIR, simply click the link right here, access VeADIR here. And that will bring us over to the current beta version of the platform. Gives us the splash screen here. Only Veritasium team members can actively participate in this beta version. Non-team members are given spectator access, which allows them to observe the VeADIR in action. So if we clear that out, this page is the portfolio page of the VeADIR. There's various functionalities on this page. Starting in the top left corner, the VeADIR menu bars, and you'll note right under that is the current release of the beta. This happens to be beta version 8.2018.0420. In the middle of the screen is the current portfolio of digital assets within this version of the VeADIR. Above it is the headline summary, and we can see that over the last 30 days, 23 exposures have been opened. The average exposure return on investment during that time is 11.5%, and total USD volume in the last 30 days is roughly 3,300 USD. Now you can change these duration or time indicators here to get a different view over different periods of time. So if we look over the last 7 days, we'll see that indeed the market has done quite well. We're averaging 15% over the last week. Over to the right, the VeADIR latest trades lists the most recent actions taken by the VeADIR on behalf of any client on the platform. And in this particular instance, this is the beta platform. So these are exposures opened by Veritasium employees or beta test contractors. Most recent one we'll see here, somebody created a bucket 10 hours ago with 0.106 ETH, and then 7 hours ago the VeADIR started filling that particular bucket with digital assets. In this case, the first ones it purchased was vary and PPP tokens. It will probably continue purchasing additional tokens until it fills up that particular bucket. And up in the top right corner is an informational for the quantities of Ethereum, the dollar value, or is displayed in your default currency value, in this case 0.176 ETH, and 0.072 Veritaseum, which equals approximately $8.5 US. There's an address here. If you hover over it, it will display your account, Ethereum account currently associated with this version, as well as latest notifications. And we'll explore this a little bit further in a minute, but you click the bell for that. Back to the left top side then, there's a menu 3-bar indicator here. If you click that, the menu items pull out, and you can see we've got a number of items here. First thing is the currency selector. I've got it set to USD. You can work in default Ethereum or Bitcoin or any of the other major currencies shown. I'm going to keep it on US dollars for the purpose of this video. You can also access the rental facility and the exposure facility off of the menu here. Down at the bottom is a function to enable your tokens, to get help, and to send feedback. In this case, feedback on this version of the beta. And so before we dig into actually doing any setup and configuration, excuse me, I'm going to switch to a separate account that does not have access to the VeADIR, and we'll see what that has done is this is the general public access. If you've got an account that's not approved for the platform, you will automatically be put into spectator mode. This is actually a great feature. What this allows is anybody on the internet can actually come in and look at the VeADIR platform and see what's happening. Look at the latest trades, look at the portfolio, and as we'll see by selecting the menu, you can also look at the other functionalities. So let's go ahead and look at the rental facility. And what we see here, again, from a spectator or a public view, we see that there are no current offers for offering VeADIR tokens for rent, but we do see some recent rentals over here. And we'll look at these in further depth in a minute, but it does allow you to look further into each of these particular rentals and see performance, etc. Let's go ahead and do that. If you just simply click on one, it brings up the additional details off of the right hand side here. And so what we can see looking at this, we see that this particular exposure, which was opened by someone offering their VeADIR tokens for rent, the base currency is Ethereum. The exposed value when that rental or when that offer was taken was just over $40 USD, and a fee amount of 0.014 Veritaseum. As a note, the fee in VeADIR, which is used for to pay for the research. The VeADIR actually pays for that, the research that it uses, as well as our access to the platform through the approximate $5 vary fee to get access. And in this case, for this exposure, we see it was opened on April 5th of this year, and it's a 2-year exposure going out to April 4th, 2020. We've a few other bits of information on here. We see the price of this rental was 24.9%. That means the person who offered their VeADIR tokens for rent, in other words, the rentee, there will be a percentage of the exposure's profit at the duration close of 24.9%, which will be shared with the rentee from the renter. Over on the tab itself, we see the current value of this particular exposure. Remember, it was open on April 5th for just over $40. It's now currently worth $69 and change. In terms of Ethereum, that's an 8.1% increase since it was opened. And in terms of the dollar value, a 72% increase. So we've gained actual absolute value in relation to Ethereum, as well as Ethereum itself has gained quite a bit in value since April 5th. Progress is how far along the duration path we are. In this case, just over 2% of the way towards this ultimate 2-year exposure. Now, the exposure can be terminated early. We'll talk about that in a second. So even though it goes out to 2 years, you can get access to your funds. You can essentially close out the exposure early and get a return of whatever the contents are at that particular time. The next icon over here is the performance. This gives you kind of a breakout of the Ethereum. We see that we opened it with 0.106 and it's currently 0.115. That gives us our 8%. We see the increase in the value, the US dollar value of Ethereum, and the value of the entire exposure in USD. Now, if you change your default currency from USD to some other currency, it will display in the value of that currency. Also, you may have noted the value here is real time. This is updated continually as the values change of the underlying assets. All right, next icon over is the bucket contents. So this gives us a graphical view of what digital assets the VeADIR has placed within this particular bucket. We see the list of them here. This is what was filled in a starting allocation percentage based on the VeADIR's rules and knowledge base that it has access to. And as these assets within the exposure bucket change in value, their allocation also changes relative with the change in current price. So you'll see over time these percentages that each asset is worth within the portfolio will adjust as the price of the assets adjust. And then the final icon over here is the timeline. We can see that the exposure was opened 16 days ago and collected 16 days ago. And then as the exposure either is closed early or is closed at the end of the duration, additional items will be added to this list here. The date it was closed and settled, for example. So that's the status of a particular exposure. And if we look at the Get Very tab, it's basically the same because it's the flip side, so you'll see the recent rentals showing up on both of them here. And then the other view we can look at is exposures. And so this page brings us a list. Since we are in spectator mode, we're just looking at other users' exposures, both opened and closed in this particular version of the beta. We see that the visibility is global, meaning that this aggregated list is a list of all users' exposures. And these columns can be sorted if you're looking for anything in particular, like, okay, what's the best return here? And we can actually click that one and see that this exposure, somebody's doing very, very well with this. Currently 26% ROI in terms of Ethereum, and nearly 96%, closing in on a 100% gain just since April 3rd for this particular exposure. So this exposure is doing very well. It's got, as you can see, a little bit different bucket of assets in here, and timing and contents of this bucket are definitely going well. So again, fantastic ROI on that one. Down at the bottom here are closed exposures. Again, this is the beta test platform, so testers have been testing all functionality on here, and because of that, a number of these were closed early and thus closed at a loss. And so that's why down here you're seeing these closed exposures, primary losses. The exposures that have remained open now are benefiting from the recovery in the market. One other point of note on this page before we move on, status over here, you'll see settled or closed. So I've actually got an open exposure on here. I believe it's one of these. And what we'll be able to do is see the steps are, once the exposure is closed, it sells off. If you do not accept the assets for delivery or take delivery on the assets, the VeADIR will sell the assets, sell them into Ethereum, and hold the Ethereum within the account until the account is actually settled. So let's go ahead and close this. I'm gonna shift over back to my test account, my contractor test account for the VeADIR test platform, and we'll see the view immediately changed here. You'll also note that this is using MetaMask, if you're familiar with that. So let's go ahead and get into the portfolio screen. This is where you would enter in the very first time, and one of the first things that you're going to need to do is to configure your MetaMask account. That's actually outside the scope of this video. There are a lot of videos on the internet available that show how to configure your MetaMask, how to set up the password, back it up, etc. All that work has been done. It's fairly straightforward, but that's been done in advance of this video so that we can get on and actually perform functions. This account was, in my role as a contractor, was provided to me by Veritaseum along with the Veri and Ethereum contents within the account. So when you come in, the first thing that you're going to do is enable the tokens. You would access that through the left menu. There's also another way to get there. If you'll notice on my quantity of Veritaseum up here, 0.72, it's highlighted underneath. If I click that, it also brings you directly to the Enable Tokens pop-up. So mine is already enabled. You would just, the first time in, this is going to be not enabled. The slider will be to the left. You will simply slide that to the right and execute the MetaMask transaction. I've already done that so that we can just continue on directly. So I'll close out here. And so once we've enabled the tokens, our MetaMask is configured and good to go. Then we can go in and actually explore the platform a little more. We have gone over the looking at the assets. This is the view of one of my exposures I opened directly. Previously, I opened this on April 2nd, and as you see, it looks very, very similar to the spectator or public view with a couple small distinctions. You'll notice that the status of this exposure is in contract, and there's 3 dots here as a sub-menu on that item. We can click that and we see there is one option available to us. We could close this exposure if we wanted. So if you were to click that, it brings up the close exposure dialog, and essentially it's giving us 2 options for closing out this exposure. We can take the one on the left here, which is to simply wait for the Ethereum. In other words, select this one. The VeADIR is going to, over the course of the next 24 hours or so, approximately, it will sell the assets out of your portfolio, get back everything, all the funds back into Ethereum, and put that back into your Ethereum account once the settlement process has completed. The other option is to take delivery of assets. This is a fantastic feature. I really like this one. This feature essentially lets you utilize the VeADIR to do all the heavy lifting of determining which assets to buy through all of the research, going out to all the various exchanges, purchasing those assets and acquiring them into your bucket. That all happens automatically by the VeADIR. This is sort of the reverse of that of, well, rather than selling, I just want to take delivery. I want to, again, let the VeADIR do all the heavy lifting. It's gone out, it's bought the assets. At some point during my exposure or at the end of my exposure, I've determined that I want to take delivery of the assets. I want to hold on to them. I just want to essentially move them off the VeADIR platform into my own wallet. You can do that by going through the asset delivery functionality. We're not going to do that in this video. We'll save that for another one, but wanted to highlight that capability. Okay, the other button here that is not available, obviously, to spectators, the big orange plus button, and this is simply to open an exposure. I call that the easy button, and it's really quite easy to open an exposure. We're going to open this last, but basically you see that, there's simply a couple of fields to fill out. How much Veritaseum you want to use, which will correlate to how much Ethereum is required, how long you want to keep the duration open in terms of hours, days, weeks, months, or years. It can go up to 99 years, and then hit submit and follow the MetaMask. But before we do that, I want to come back to the beta platform. And default is it brings you into offering the VeADIR tokens. We will go through this functionality in a minute, but if I click on the Get VeADIR Tokens, we'll see that I've got actually a closed exposure down here. This exposure was closed a few days ago, and I wanted to save it for this video so that we could briefly go through the settlement process. You'll see that I did close this one out at a loss. We can actually look at the status on this one. On the informational tab, you'll see the original duration was April 3rd, 2018 through April 2nd, 2020. So it was a 2-year. You can also tell by this particular rental exposure is highlighted here. That corresponds to this one. So you can see if I click on this one, it changes and it actually highlights this one. That's how we know that that's this particular exposure we're looking at. You'll note that was the original. I closed this out then on April 8th, so it was open 5 days. So it crossed out the original duration and inserted the new shortened duration. Again, I was able to do that through the close exposure process, directly demonstrating that you are in control of all your funds at all times on the platform. So under closed exposures, what I want to do now, so the VeADIR closed it out, it sold off the assets. We know that by looking at the bucket contents here. We see that the only contents listed here is the 0.102 Ethereum tokens. And so what we can do is click the little dollar icon here. If you hover over it, it says settle. We'll go ahead and click that. We'll see that it pops up a MetaMask notification along with the gas limit and gas price. These are pre-configured and pre-filled by the VeADIR. I would recommend just taking the defaults for these. They work very well. You can confirm that using ethgasstation. In fact, let's do that real quick. If we go over to ethgasstation.info, you can see that the safest, lowest recommended GUI right now is 0.4. If we want our transaction to complete and be confirmed in less than 5 minutes, we'll want to give it 1 GUI. If we want fast or less than 2 minutes, we're going to have to give it 3 GUI. So for this particular one, just for purposes of the demo, I'm going to go ahead and say 3 GUI so that we'll quickly get through it. But again, normally I would just take the default. So I'm going to submit that. We'll see that it pops up a notification at the bottom. You can go look at the typical Etherscan notification that pops up for the confirmations. You can sit and follow that if you want. One thing we can take note of now, the status has changed to settling. If we come over here now to the timeline view on this exposure, we see opened and collected both 18 days ago. I initiated the closure 13 days ago. This one actually was closed 5 days ago. There was an issue in the VeADIR at the time, which has now been resolved, which caused the delay of this actual closure. And we'll see now the information popping up here that this particular transaction has settled. Now the renter has settled a minute ago, and the rentee settled. And so since this was an exposure opened via rental, we we can take note that both halves of this exposure have been settled for both parties. Now, looking at this, we see that it was a 20% price on it. However, we see there was a loss on this, both in terms of Ethereum and dollar value. And so in this particular instance, what that means is the renter, the person, renter settled. Renter settled. I wonder if one should say rentee and one renter. But in any case, the rentee is the person with the Veritaseum. Normally, if there would be a profit, say if there was a 100% profit, the renter, the person bringing the Veritaseum to the table, specified a 20% price, so they would be entitled to 20% of that 100% return. The renter, the person with the Ethereum in this case, would be entitled to the remainder of that value. Okay, let's now go ahead and go to a new exposure. First thing I want to do, get VeADIR tokens. What this implies is that you've got Ethereum to spend to open an exposure, but no Veritaseum. Offer VeADIR is just the opposite. You've got Veritaseum, but no Ethereum. And so looking up at our current balances here, we see that we have enough. For the beta limit on the Veritaseum, it's telling me a 0.1 lower limit or minimum quantity for the Ethereum. That would equate to 0.13 Veritaseum. So what will happen, I'll submit this offer, or when I submit it, it's gonna be waiting for another party to come with the 0.13 Veritaseum to complete this particular exposure. So I've got I'm going to offer up, or I want to get, I don't have any Veritaseum. I need 0.13 to close this. I do have 0.1 Ethereum I want to put into the exposure. As a price, let's kind of look at these as a guide. The market will ultimately tell, but let's go ahead and just say, give it all twos here, 22.22%. Now, in terms of a duration, this is going to be the duration for both parties. It will be the duration of the exposure. I'd like to put my Ethereum to work out here for, let's say, a period of 6 months. And so you'll see I can select this in any terms of hours, days, weeks, months, or years. Again, I'm looking for 6 months. And expiration is how long this offer will be valid on the platform. I want it to remain valid until either I cancel it or someone takes it. So I'm going to leave this empty. So we will go ahead and submit this. It gives us the confirmation screen. We need to review that. I've read that already, so we will continue. We will get the MetaMask notification. Can go ahead and submit that. We see the transaction created. We can look at that on Etherscan if we want, and we will see the offer is in currently being created here. And so we see over to the right, the offer is being added. When that offer comes up, then it will display for other users. Important note, since it'd make no sense to take the other side of your own offer. You cannot directly see your own offers on the platform. I'll show you a pro tip on how to do that if you are interested. So while that one's running, let's go ahead then and switch over to offering VeADIR tokens. Now this process is basically the same. If we want to open up a VeADIR token, and maybe I'll do this one at the very end, but you essentially do the same thing, only instead of putting in terms of Ethereum like we did the first time, we're going to do it in terms of Veritaseum, since we have Veritaseum. And so I did see the notification pop up. So if we come back to the Get VeADIR Token tab, we'll see here my offer has been listed under my offers. And so this offer, remember, is has Ethereum with it, has 0.1 Ethereum worth approximately $60. That offer will actually display for other users in the offers up here. Since if you have VeADIR tokens and are looking to partner with another user that offered up their Ethereum like I just did, you would see that in this particular part of the pane right here. So another item to note, we'll see that I'm sorry, back to this one, we'll see just on the timeline that the renter added the offer. So the renter, again, that's the person with the Ethereum. Okay, let's go ahead then and offer up some VeADIR tokens. So this is a different use case. This is where I've got Veritaseum that I'd like to put to work in an exposure, but I don't have Ethereum. And so we want to put in our offer of Veritaseum and look for a different user that has Ethereum that can come take the other half of our offer. And so in this case, we see that to offer our Veritaseum, lower limit of the beta 0.014, very reasonable. So we'll say 0.014. We want to open up that exposure. That would give an exposure value of $64. So in other words, $64 worth of Ethereum. I'm just kind of thinking out loud in terms of best usage of my limited funds here. What I'm going to do next, I'm going to go ahead and skip over to opening an exposure directly, and then we'll double back, and with whatever Veritaseum is left, we'll offer that up for rent. So again, coming over to the exposure screen, this is actually my favorite. It's so easy. You really simply just come in, and to open a new exposure, push the big orange plus, and what we're going to do, what my intent here to do is to use up as much of this 0.178 Ethereum in this exposure as possible. I want to maximize this out, and so essentially what I want to do is look for a value. 0.025 is too much. So if we look at 0.023 Veritaseum, that would require Ethereum in the amount of $105 at 0.779. Well, we see I've got 107.777. So I definitely have enough there. And so now all I need to do is figure out my duration. And so for this duration, let's go ahead and do something for a longer term. I'd like this one to actually extend out over a longer period of time. So let's go ahead and say, we want this exposure to come back to us in 3 years. What this is saying is at the end of 3 years, the exposure will automatically close out and return my funds, my profit to me in Ethereum to my account, unless I close early through the early close exposure and or take delivery function we reviewed before. So 3-year exposure, 0.023 Veritaseum is going to give me $105 roughly exposure. So I'll go ahead and submit that. We'll take the default on the GUI. Boom, there we go. And there's our Etherscan transaction that will come up in a few minutes. Again, same thing we see here, the pending status and the spinning circle and notification over here. It is opening the exposure. As soon as that exposure is open, these statuses will be updated. So if we go ahead and come back to the portfolio page, what we see here is when the new exposure opens, we'll see something similar to this right here. The VeADIR under the latest trades will say bucket created, and then the amount of Ethereum associated with that bucket. Okay, so then the last thing we want to do in this particular video, we want to come back. I do have some Veritaseum here that I'd like to put to use rather than just sitting idle in the account. So I want to actually offer my Veritaseum tokens. To do that, I'm just going to click here. I'm going to go ahead and use up 0.049. Use up basically what's left of this Veritaseum, and what kind of price do we want to put on this one? Let's give them a deal. Let's give them a 19.999 ROI. Now, how long do I want to offer my Veri up? Well, just kind of role playing. Today's towards the end of April. I'd like to have the Veritaseum back before the end of the year. Not real picky on a time frame, but I'm kind of thinking about a 6-month duration on here. Seems about right. And again, I don't have to fill in the expiration. I'll go ahead and fill it in here just to demonstrate that capability. I want to keep this particular exposure open for, let's call it 14 days, approximately May 5th. If this exposure, or if this offer of Veri tokens is not accepted by someone to open an exposure, it will automatically expire in 14 days. So we can hit confirm on that, pop up the MetaMask, again take the default, and away it goes. And so there we go. We're now adding the offer for the Veri tokens. And so if we come back over, we see the offer to get Veri tokens we opened let's go ahead and jump down to the exposure. New exposure still is not listed there. That tells me that it's still in process, and so we'll have to take a peek at that later. So that's it for today. I think we've covered all the functionality within the VeADIR, at least for the beginning user. I hope this is helpful, and enjoy your use of the VeADIR, and I hope your experience is a profitable experience. Thank you very much. Take care.